Christmas Eve in Harmony Springs, Montana. The snow fell thick and silent, blanketing the small town in a deceptive peace. Ben Thompson locked up his veterinary clinic, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air when he noticed her. A solitary figure on the park bench across the street. She'd been sitting there since 2 in the afternoon, and now it was past 8. The woman wore a military jacket but no hat, letting the snow accumulate on her dark hair like she didn't feel the cold anymore. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness, showing 12 missed calls from someone named Mom, but she never answered. When she finally stood and walked toward the road, something made her stop and turn back toward his house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the sound of a child's laughter carried on the winter wind. Maybe I should ask if she wants to have dinner with us, Ben thought, stepping outside into the snow. But as their eyes met across the frozen street, something flickered in her expression. Recognition? Fear? Or perhaps something far more dangerous than either of them was ready to face. Harmony Springs was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement usually came from the high school football games or the annual county fair. Population 3,200, nestled between rolling hills and endless sky, 15 miles from Malmstrom Air Force Base. The town had 2 traffic lights, 1 grocery store, and a diner that served the best apple pie in 3 counties. Ben Thompson had called it home for 36 years, first as the mayor's son, then as the local veterinarian who'd taken over Doc Wilson's practice when the old man retired. He lived with his 7-year-old son Noah in a 2-story house his grandfather had built, complete with a wraparound porch and a red barn that now served as his clinic's overflow storage. Ben wore his usual flannel shirt tonight, navy blue with thin white stripes, the same pattern his late wife Claire had said made his eyes look like storm clouds. The blue knit scarf around his neck was Claire's handiwork, finished just weeks before the accident that took her away 3 years ago. As he approached the woman on the bench, something about her stillness reminded him of those awful nights when he'd sit in hospital waiting rooms, hoping for news that never came. The snow continued to fall around them, creating a blanket of silence that seemed to muffle even their thoughts. The woman looked up as Ben crossed the street, and he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her military jacket was well worn but clean, and her jeans were tucked into combat boots that had seen better days. She had the kind of face that belonged in old photographs, strong-featured and serious, with eyes that seemed to hold more stories than any one person should carry. "Excuse me," Ben said, his voice carrying easily in the crisp night air. "Are you okay out here? It's getting pretty cold." She studied him for a moment, and he noticed how her hands were steady despite the temperature, how she sat with perfect posture, even on the uncomfortable bench. "I'm fine," she replied, but her voice carried a slight tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "Just thinking." Ben glanced at the phone in her lap, still showing those missed calls, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "I'm Ben Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I live right there, and my son and I are about to have dinner. Would you like to join us?" The invitation hung in the air between them, simple but somehow weighted with possibility. Something in her expression shifted, like a door opening just a crack. The woman hesitated, and Ben could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. "I don't want to intrude," she said finally. "It's Christmas Eve. You should be with your family." "Well," Ben said with a small smile, "it's just me and Noah tonight, and he's been talking about airplanes all week after seeing the jets fly over from the base. I bet he'd love to meet someone who actually knows about them." That seemed to catch her attention, and she looked toward his house, where warm yellow light spilled from the windows. "I'm Sarah," she said, standing and brushing snow from her jacket. "Sarah Collins. And I'd like that, actually." As they walked toward his house, Ben noticed how she moved with military precision, how she automatically scanned their surroundings, how she seemed to carry some invisible weight that made every step deliberate. The snow crunched under their feet, the only sound in the quiet night except for the distant hum of the base's operations. "Sarah," he said as they reached his porch, "can I ask what brings you to Harmony Springs on Christmas Eve?" She paused with her hand on the railing, and for a moment, Ben thought she might turn around and leave. Instead, she looked up at the night sky where stars fought to shine through the falling snow. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you just need to find a place where nobody knows your story." The interior of Ben's house was everything Sarah hadn't expected from a single father's home. The living room was warm and inviting, with a Christmas tree in the corner strung with lights that Noah had clearly hung himself, judging by the concentration of ornaments on the lower branches. The furniture was comfortable but not fancy, the kind of pieces chosen for durability rather than style. Family photos lined the mantel, showing a younger Ben with a beautiful woman and a baby who must have been Noah. The house smelled like cinnamon and something savory that made Sarah's stomach remind her how long it had been since she'd cared about food. "Daddy?" a voice called from the kitchen, and a boy with Ben's dark hair and his mother's gentle smile came running into the room. "Is that a real soldier?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Sarah felt something inside her chest loosen at the child's innocent excitement. "I'm in the Air Force," she said, kneeling down to his level. "I fly jets." "Real jets? Like the ones that go over our house?" Noah's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Even faster than those," she said, and Noah's face lit up like the Christmas tree behind him. Ben watched the exchange with something that might have been relief, noting how natural Sarah seemed with his son, how she didn't talk down to him or treat him like he was fragile. "Are you hungry?" Ben asked, and Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something savory that made Sarah's stomach remind her how long it had been since she'd cared about food. Ben moved around the space with easy confidence, stirring a pot of what appeared to be chili, pulling cornbread from the oven, setting an extra place at the small table without making a big deal about it. "Can Sarah see my airplane?" Noah asked, tugging on his father's sleeve. "After dinner, buddy," Ben said, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's not overwhelm our guest." But Sarah was already following Noah to the living room, where he'd built an elaborate airport from blocks and toy planes. "This one's an F-16, Noah said, holding up a small jet. "It goes really fast and makes loud noises." Sarah picked up the toy, turning it over in her hands, and Ben noticed how her fingers traced the wings with practiced familiarity. "You know a lot about planes," she said to Noah, but her voice sounded strange, almost hollow. "My daddy used to build airplanes before he became an animal doctor," Noah said matter-of-factly. "Says flying is like magic, but magic that follows rules." Sarah looked up at Ben sharply, and he saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition? "You were an aerospace engineer?" she asked, and Ben nodded, wondering why that seemed to matter to her. "A long time ago," he said. "Things change." Over dinner, Sarah found herself relaxing, despite her better judgment. Noah chattered about school and his friends and the puppy he wanted for his birthday, while Ben listened with the kind of attention that spoke of long practice at being both mother and father. The chili was perfect, warming her from the inside out, and the cornbread was homemade in a way that spoke of care and time. "Do you have kids?" Noah asked Sarah, and she shook her head. "I have a little brother back in Texas," she said. "He's about your age, actually. His name is Danny." "Why aren't you with him for Christmas?" Noah asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood, and Sarah felt Ben's eyes on her, waiting for her answer. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work on Christmas," she said carefully. "Sometimes duty calls." Ben sensed there was more to the story, but he didn't push. Instead, he told Noah about the time he'd had to deliver a calf on Christmas morning, how the farmer had invited him to stay for breakfast, how sometimes the most important work happened when you least expected it. Sarah listened to the story, noting how Ben's voice grew warm when he talked about his work, how his hands moved as he described the procedure, how he made even the difficult parts sound like adventures. When Noah excused himself to use the bathroom, Sarah and Ben found themselves alone for the first time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, for not asking questions. Everyone deserves a warm meal on Christmas Eve," Ben replied. But he was studying her face, trying to place the nagging feeling that he'd seen her somewhere before. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn into the rhythm of their household. She helped Noah with a jigsaw puzzle while Ben cleaned up the dishes, and she noticed how the boy's eyes grew heavy as bedtime approached. "I should go," she said, but Ben was already shaking his head. "The storm's getting worse," he said, nodding toward the window where snow was now falling in thick sheets. "You shouldn't drive in this weather. The couch pulls out into a bed." Sarah wanted to protest, but the truth was she had nowhere else to go. Her hotel reservation wasn't until the next day, and she'd been dreading the long, empty hours until then. "Are you sure?" she asked, and Ben was already pulling blankets from the hall closet. "Noah would never forgive me if I let his new friend disappear into a blizzard," he said. And Sarah felt that strange loosening in her chest again. As Ben tucked Noah into bed, she could hear their voices through the thin walls. Noah's questions about whether Sarah would still be there in the morning. Ben's gentle reassurances. The quiet goodnight that spoke of years of routine and love. When Ben came back downstairs, he found Sarah standing by the window, watching the snow fall. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, and she turned to face him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I was just thinking," she said, "about how peaceful this is, how normal." There was something in her voice that made Ben think normal was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. That night, Sarah lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her. She could hear Ben moving around upstairs, the soft sounds of someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. The snow continued to fall outside, and she found herself thinking about the last time she'd felt this safe, this welcome. It had been years, maybe since before her first deployment, before she'd learned that home could be a luxury rather than a given. Her phone buzzed with another missed call from her mother, and she quickly silenced it. Some conversations were too complicated for Christmas Eve, too loaded with expectations and disappointments she wasn't ready to face. Instead, she thought about Noah's innocent questions, about Ben's quiet kindness, about the way this house felt like the kind of place where people belonged. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, she was sitting up in a cold sweat, her heart racing from a dream she couldn't quite remember. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner, and she realized she was crying. "Are you okay?" Ben's voice came from the stairs, and she wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Just a bad dream." Ben came down the stairs, wearing flannel pajamas that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, and Sarah shook her head. "Some things are better left in dreams," she said, but she was grateful when he didn't immediately go back upstairs. The next morning, Christmas Day, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, to the sound of Noah's laughter echoing through the house. She found them in the kitchen, Noah still in his pajamas, Ben flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Merry Christmas," Ben said, and there was something in his smile that made her chest tighten. "Merry Christmas," she replied, and realized she meant it for the first time in years. Noah had insisted on making her a Christmas card, a construction paper airplane with "Thank you for staying" written in careful 7-year-old handwriting. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she accepted the gift, and she had to clear her throat before she could speak. "This is beautiful, Noah," she said. "I'll treasure it." Over breakfast, she told them stories about flying, about the view from 30,000 feet, about the way the world looked small and manageable from that height. She was careful to keep the stories light, to avoid the darker aspects of her service. But she noticed how Ben listened with the intensity of someone who understood the technical aspects of what she was describing. "You really know your stuff," she said, and Ben shrugged. "Old habits," he said. "I used to design systems for civilian aircraft before—" He trailed off, glancing at Noah, and Sarah sensed there was a story there too. "Before you became a veterinarian," she finished, and Ben nodded. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," he said. After breakfast, Noah wanted to show Sarah his room, and she found herself charmed by the boy's enthusiasm for everything from his collection of toy airplanes to his drawings of flying machines that defied physics. "I'm going to be a pilot like you," he announced, and Sarah felt a complex mix of pride and concern. "That's a big dream," she said, "but dreams are important." She noticed a photo on his nightstand, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and Noah's gentle smile. "Is that your mom?" she asked, and Noah nodded solemnly. "She's in heaven now," he said with a matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Daddy says she's watching over us." Sarah's chest tightened, and she had to look away from the photo. "I'm sure she is," she said. "She looks like she was very special." "She was," Noah said. "She died in an airplane crash. That's why Daddy doesn't like to talk about flying sometimes." Sarah felt the world tilt around her, and she had to grip the edge of Noah's dresser to steady herself. "An airplane crash," she repeated, and Noah nodded. 3 years ago. Daddy was on the plane too, but he didn't die. Sometimes I think he wishes he did, though. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process this information, trying to understand why it felt so important. "Noah," she said carefully, "do you know what kind of plane it was?" But before Noah could answer, Ben appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay up here?" he asked, and Sarah saw him notice her pale complexion, the way she was gripping the furniture. "Fine," she said quickly, "just admiring Noah's room." But as they headed back downstairs, Sarah's mind was spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. The afternoon passed in a blur of comfortable domesticity that Sarah found both soothing and unsettling. She helped Noah build a snow fort in the backyard while Ben worked on some paperwork, and she found herself laughing at the boy's determination to make the walls perfectly symmetrical. "You're very patient," Ben observed, watching from the kitchen window as Sarah patiently helped Noah rebuild a section that had collapsed. "I'm good with kids," she said when they came back inside, stomping snow off their boots. "My little brother taught me that." They spent the rest of the afternoon playing board games and watching Christmas movies, and Sarah found herself studying Ben's face when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something familiar about him, something that nagged at the edges of her memory. She noticed how his hands moved when he talked, how he had a small scar above his left eyebrow, how he seemed to carry a sadness that matched her own. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked during a quiet moment when Noah was absorbed in his new coloring book. "You seem distracted." Sarah wanted to tell him about the growing certainty that their meeting wasn't as random as it seemed, but she wasn't ready for that conversation. "Just tired," she said instead. "It's been a long few days." Ben nodded, but she could see he didn't entirely believe her. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. "Harmony Springs isn't going anywhere, and neither are we." The kindness in his voice made her throat tight, and she had to look away before she said something she might regret. That evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Sarah found herself alone with Ben in the living room, the Christmas tree lights casting gentle shadows on the walls. "Can I ask you something?" she said, and Ben nodded. "The airplane crash that killed your wife, do you remember anything about it?" Ben's face went very still, and she saw his hands clench in his lap. "Why do you want to know?" he asked, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "Because," Sarah said carefully, "I think I might have been there." The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah watched as understanding dawned in Ben's eyes. "You were there," he said slowly. "You were the pilot, the one who—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Sarah nodded. "I was the one who guided your plane away from the town," she said. "I was the one who made the decision to save you instead of—" She stopped, unable to voice what they both knew, that her choice had cost Claire her life. Ben stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "All this time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "all this time, I've been wondering who you were, why you looked so familiar. And you're her. You're the pilot who saved my life." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, and she had to force herself to meet his gaze. "I'm the pilot who killed your wife," she said. "I'm the one who chose to save the town instead of trying to save everyone on the plane." The words hung between them like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Ben turned away from her, his shoulders shaking, and Sarah prepared for his anger, for the blame she'd been carrying for 3 years. But when he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Do you know what Claire's last words were?" he asked, and Sarah shook her head. She said, "Save the children." There was a school below us and she could see the kids outside for recess. She told me to tell the pilot to save the children. Sarah felt the world shift around her, and she had to grip the arm of the couch to keep from falling. She understood, Ben continued, turning back to face her. Even in those last moments, she understood what you had to do. She agreed with your choice. Sarah couldn't hold back the tears anymore, and she buried her face in her hands. I've been living with the guilt for 3 years, she whispered. I've been running from it, trying to forget, trying to make it make sense. Ben sat down beside her, and she felt his hand on her shoulder. You saved my life, he said simply. You saved 200 children in that school. You made an impossible choice, and you made it right. Sarah looked up at him through her tears, seeing not anger but understanding in his eyes. How can you forgive me? She asked. How can you sit here and tell me it's okay when I'm the reason your wife is dead? Ben was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was steady. Because Claire would want me to, he said. Because holding on to anger won't bring her back, and it won't heal either of us. Because sometimes the hardest thing is learning to forgive ourselves. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspension, as if Sarah and Ben were both waiting for something to shift or settle. Sarah had extended her stay at the local motel, unable to bring herself to leave, but unsure of her welcome. Ben had grown quieter, more thoughtful, and she could see him processing everything they'd revealed to each other. Noah seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, becoming more clingy with both of them, as if he was afraid one of them might disappear. Are you going to go away? He asked Sarah one afternoon, when she'd come by to help with the animals at the clinic. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't really have anywhere to go. You could stay here, Noah said, with the simple logic of childhood. Daddy likes you, and I like you, and you don't have anywhere else to be. Sarah felt her heart break a little at his innocence. It's not that simple, sweetheart, she said. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about things, but even as she said it, she found herself wondering if maybe it could be that simple. Over the past few days, she'd felt more at home in Harmony Springs than she had anywhere in years. She'd helped Ben with his practice, using her medical training to assist with surgeries, and she'd discovered a talent for calming frightened animals. She'd cooked dinner for the 3 of them, helped Noah with his homework, and fallen into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. But she could also see the conflict in Ben's eyes, the way he sometimes looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. Everything changed on New Year's Eve. Sarah was at the clinic, helping Ben with a difficult surgery on a dog that had been hit by a car, when her phone rang. It was Colonel Morrison from Malmstrom, her commanding officer. Collins! His voice was sharp through the speaker. Where the hell are you? You were supposed to report back 3 days ago. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. In all the emotional upheaval of the past week, she'd forgotten about her orders. Sir, I can explain. No explanations, Morrison cut her off. You're AWOL, Captain. I'm sending MPs to collect you now. Ben looked up from the surgery, seeing the panic in her eyes. What's wrong? He asked. I have to go, Sarah said, her voice hollow. I'm in trouble. I forgot I was supposed to report back to base. Before Ben could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles outside. Through the window, they could see 2 military police cars pulling up to the clinic. Captain Sarah Collins, one of the MPs called as they entered the building. You're under arrest for being absent without leave. Sarah didn't resist as they cuffed her, but she looked back at Ben with desperation in her eyes. Take care of Noah, she said. Tell him I'm sorry. As they led her away, Ben stood frozen, his hands still covered in surgical gloves, watching the woman who had become so important to him disappear into the night. It was Noah who broke the silence, emerging from the back room where he'd been playing. Where did Sarah go? He asked, and Ben realized he didn't know how to answer that question. The next few days were the longest of Ben's life. He tried to focus on his work, on taking care of Noah, on the normal rhythms of their life. But everything felt wrong without Sarah there. He called the base repeatedly, trying to get information about her situation, but he was told that Captain Collins was facing a disciplinary hearing and wasn't allowed visitors. Noah asked about her constantly, and Ben found himself making excuses that became thinner each day. She'll come back, Noah said with the certainty of childhood. She promised she would. But Ben wasn't so sure. He'd seen the resignation in Sarah's eyes as they'd taken her away, the way she'd seemed to be saying goodbye, permanently. It was Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, who finally forced Ben to face the truth. "That girl's been sitting in that park every day for a week," she said, nodding toward the bench where he'd first seen Sarah. "Just sitting there, staring at your house. I think she's trying to work up the courage to knock on your door." Ben looked out the window and saw Sarah's familiar figure on the bench, and his heart clenched. She was back, but she was keeping her distance, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Why don't you go talk to her?" Mrs. Henderson suggested. "Sometimes people need permission to come home." Ben handed Noah to Mrs. Henderson and walked across the street, his heart hammering in his chest. Sarah looked up as he approached, and he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," she said. "I didn't know if I should come back." Ben sat down beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Of course I want to see you," he said. "We both do. Noah's been asking about you every day." Sarah's disciplinary hearing had been a nightmare, but it had also been a revelation. She'd been prepared for the worst: court-martial, discharge, prison. But Colonel Morrison had surprised her. "Collins," he'd said, "you've been one of our best pilots for 8 years. You've never missed a mission, never complained about an assignment, never given me a moment's trouble. So I'm going to ask you once. What the hell happened?" Sarah had told him everything. About the anniversary of the crash, about her PTSD, about finding the families she'd saved and not knowing how to handle it. Morrison had listened without interruption, and when she finished, he'd been quiet for a long moment. "You saved 200 kids that day," he'd said finally. "And you've been punishing yourself for it ever since. That's not serving anyone, Collins. Not the Air Force, not those kids, and certainly not you." The result had been a medical discharge with full honors, a pension, and a recommendation for civilian therapy. Sarah was free to go wherever she wanted, to be whatever she chose to be. "I chose to come back here," she told Ben as they sat on the bench. "If you'll have me." Ben turned to face her, and she could see the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Sarah," he said, "this is where you belong. This is where you've always belonged." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the late afternoon sun paint the snow golden. "There's something else," Sarah said finally. "I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life now. And I realized I want to help people heal. Animals, people, whatever needs healing. I want to work with you if you'll let me." Ben felt a smile spread across his face. "Partner," he said, extending his hand. "I'd like that very much." Spring came early to Harmony Springs that year, and with it changes that felt both natural and profound. Sarah had moved into the apartment above the clinic, and she and Ben had officially become partners in the practice. She'd brought her military medical training to the work, and together they'd expanded their services to include therapy animals for veterans. Noah had adapted to the changes with the resilience of childhood, and he'd started calling Sarah Aunt Sarah without any prompting from the adults. The town had accepted her with the easy grace of small communities, and she'd found herself woven into the fabric of their lives in ways she'd never expected. On Easter Sunday, the three of them sat in the front pew of the little white church on Main Street, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. After the service, they walked to the cemetery where Claire was buried, and Sarah placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. "Thank you," she whispered, and she felt Ben's hand slip into hers, "for understanding, for forgiving, for making it possible." That afternoon they had their first family barbecue in the backyard, and Sarah watched Ben flip burgers while Noah played with their newest rescue dog. "This is nice," Ben said, coming to stand beside her. "This feels right." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I never thought I'd have this," she said finally. "I never thought I deserved it." Ben turned to face her, and she saw all the love and acceptance in his eyes. "We all deserve to heal," he said. "We all deserve to find our way home." As the sun set over Harmony Springs, Sarah felt the last of her guilt finally lift away, replaced by something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The blue scarf that had started it all, now hung on a hook by the back door, ready for whoever might need its warmth. Sarah had learned to knit from Mrs. Henderson, and she'd added her own pattern to Claire's original design, a series of small airplanes that looked like they were flying toward home. Noah had his own scarf now, knitted in bright red wool, and he wore it everywhere, despite the warming weather. "It's my flying scarf," he'd explain to anyone who asked. "It helps me remember that home is where people love you." On quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on the front porch and watch the jets from Malmstrom fly overhead, and she no longer felt the old panic or guilt. Instead, she felt gratitude for the choice she'd made, for the lives she'd saved, for the family she'd found in the most unexpected place. Ben would join her sometimes, and they'd sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. They didn't talk about the future much, but they didn't need to. They had found their rhythm, their place, their peace. And in Harmony Springs, that was enough. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting. Sometimes it looks like remembering with love instead of pain. Sometimes home isn't a place you're born, to sometimes it's a place you're brave enough to choose. And sometimes the most important flights are the ones that bring you back to earth, back to the people who need you, back to the life you're meant to live. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Sarah found herself back on the bench across from Ben's house, but this time she wasn't alone. Noah sat beside her, both of them watching Ben hang lights on the front porch. "Are you going to ask him to marry you?" Noah asked with the directness of an 8-year-old. Sarah laughed, pulling him closer. "That's a very grown-up question," she said. "Do you think I should?" Noah considered this seriously. "I think you should ask him if he wants to be a family officially," he said. "Because we're already a family really, aren't we?" Sarah felt her heart swell with love for this remarkable child who had helped heal them all. "Yes," she said, "we really are." As they walked across the street together, Sarah noticed that Ben had hung a new ornament on the tree visible through the front window, a small airplane with silver wings, flying toward a bright star. Inside the house, the three of them sat around the tree, and Sarah reached into her pocket for the small velvet box she'd been carrying for weeks. "Ben," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I have something to ask you." But before she could continue, Ben was pulling out his own small box, and they both started laughing. "Great minds," Ben said, and Sarah felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "I think," she said, "Claire would approve." "I know she would," Ben replied, slipping the ring onto her finger. "She always said the best gifts come in the most unexpected packages." As midnight approached and Christmas Day dawned, the three of them fell asleep under the Christmas tree, wrapped in Claire's blue scarf, a family finally complete.